It begins with a photograph, blurry, faded, the kind of image that looks like nothing until you stare at it too long. In the bottom right corner, barely visible, a woman in a sun hat is helping a little girl into a narrow green canoe. The girl, maybe 10, wears a yellow rain poncho 2 sizes too big. Her face is turned slightly away. The woman's camera hangs from her neck. Behind them, a wide brown river coils like a serpent through the jungle, thick with mist. That's it. That's the last time anyone ever saw Claudia Rivera or her daughter Sofia. The photo was taken by another tourist, a Canadian couple on their way upriver. They didn't even realize they had captured the moment until they were back home, flipping through pictures, weeks after the news broke. By then, the rainforest had already swallowed them whole. It was July 2007. Deep in the Javari Valley, a remote and largely uncharted corner of the western Brazilian Amazon, a mother and daughter vanished without a sound. No distress signal, no emergency calls, no torn clothes or overturned boat. Nothing. Claudia Rivera, a 39-year-old wildlife photographer from Buenos Aires, was in the middle of a 6-week expedition to document endangered river dolphins and rainforest mammals. She brought her daughter with her, Sofia Rivera, age 10, her only child. Locals remember seeing the two depart from a jungle outpost called São Pedro do Javari, accompanied by a local guide and a small tour operator's boat. They were expected to return 4 days later. They never did. Search teams were deployed, helicopters, boats, trackers. Nothing turned up. No gear, no footprints, no bodies. It was as if the forest had inhaled them and simply refused to exhale. The satellite phone Claudia carried with her was never activated. The GPS transponder never pinged. Over time, theories began to spread: pirates, jaguars, illegal logging crews. But no theory explained the complete and total absence of any sign of struggle or escape. Just that one blurry photo. A moment frozen in time. A canoe pushing off from shore, and 2 people smiling on the edge of vanishing. Claudia Rivera believed in the wild, not just photographing it, but being in it, feeling its breath, its danger, its beauty. She'd spent years chasing rare animals across Patagonia, cataloging species on the brink of extinction. But this trip was different. It was supposed to be her last big project before taking a teaching job back in Argentina, and she wanted to share it with her daughter. Sofia was 10, curious, bright, and surprisingly fearless. She loved maps, bugs, and drawing birds she saw outside the windows of buses and boats. Claudia used to joke that Sofia had rainforest blood in her. This was their dream, one last adventure together. The plan had been thorough. Claudia booked a licensed eco-tour company based in Manaus. She arranged permits to enter the protected Javari Valley, hired a veteran guide with 20 years of experience, brought a satellite phone, 2 water filters, solar chargers, and enough supplies to last a week longer than scheduled. She even left behind a full itinerary with her editor in Buenos Aires, complete with coordinates. Everything was planned. They flew into Atalaya do Norte, then boarded a riverboat that carried them west into the maze of flooded jungle and remote tributaries. On July 3rd, they reached São Pedro do Javari, a small indigenous village near the Colombian border. The next morning, they pushed deeper into the rainforest with their guide, an older man named Elcio, known by locals as the River Walker. That was the last confirmed sighting. Locals later said it was typical weather, humid, thick with insects, the kind of heat that bends the air. The river current was strong but manageable. Claudia had been here before, years earlier, and knew how unpredictable it could be. But she wasn't reckless. She was calculated, smart, prepared, which made what happened next even more unsettling. When they missed their check-in window by 72 hours, the tour operator notified authorities. By day 5, search teams were sweeping the river by air and boat. By day 10, they had found only silence. The guide's family insisted he was no amateur. But he had disappeared too. 3 people gone, a canoe missing, not a single footprint on the banks. Claudia's gear was never recovered. Sophia's drawings, her journals, her backpack, lost. It was as if the Rainforest had rewritten their story and removed every page. A dream trip had turned into one of the strangest missing persons cases in the history of the Amazon. The morning they left, it was raining, not heavy, just the kind of jungle rain that hangs in the air like breath. Villagers in São Pedro do Javari remember seeing Claudia in a light blue rain jacket, camera bag over her shoulder, her daughter Sophia hopping from foot to foot, restless and excited. Elcio, their guide, stood barefoot in the mud, checking the outboard motor with the care of a man who'd spent more time on water than land. The small fiberglass canoe was packed with gear, tents, food, a collapsible cooking stove, dry bags of clothes, and Claudia's photography equipment carefully wrapped in waterproof cases. They weren't rushing. There was no reason to. The forest was calm. Everything seemed normal, until it wasn't. Locals say Claudia had asked about a place called Lago do Esquecido, the Forgotten Lake, a flooded oxbow deep beyond the main tributaries, marked on few maps, known more by whisper than by name. Elcio had been there once, years ago. He warned her it was remote, hard to reach, full of hidden channels and floating debris that could snap a motor in half. Others in the village tried to dissuade her. Too far, one elder said. Too quiet. But Claudia smiled, said they'd be back in 3 days. She left behind a gift for the village children, a bag of colored pencils and drawing pads from Argentina. The canoe departed just after 9 a.m., sliding down the mist-covered Javari like a shadow. A fisherman named Rinaldo watched them vanish into a narrow gap between trees where the river bends sharply east. He remembers Sophia waving, her poncho flapping like a yellow flag. That was the last time anyone saw either of them. For 2 days, the forest held its breath. Then came the silence. In a place where people measure distance by hours on water and signal strength is a rumor, the absence of contact wasn't immediately alarming. But when day 4 came and there was still no word, no radio call, no smoke from a campfire, no return of the boat, worry began to spread. People said the forest had taken them, that the Forgotten Lake had lived up to its name. Because in the Amazon, there are places even the maps don't trust. On the 5th day, the tour operator filed an official report. Within 48 hours, a search party launched from Atalaya do Norte, 2 boats, 1 helicopter, and a team of military police familiar with the region. What they expected to find was a stalled boat, maybe a broken motor, 3 hungry travelers camped out along the riverbank, waiting for rescue. What they found was nothing. Not a flare, not a footprint. The jungle swallowed sound, and with it, every trace of Claudia, Sophia, and Elcio. Then something strange happened. On the 7th day, a logging crew working illegally along the edge of the Javari reported seeing a man stumbling alone through the trees, mud-covered, soaked, muttering incoherently in Portuguese. It was Elcio. He had no boat, no supplies. Just the clothes on his back and deep gashes along both forearms. They said he looked like he hadn't slept in days. When they tried to help him, he resisted. He kept saying the same thing over and over, "She's still in there." The mother stayed. He collapsed soon after and was rushed by boat to a clinic in Benjamin Constant. Doctors said he was dehydrated, malnourished, and suffering from exposure. He barely spoke. When he did, it was disjointed. Fragments about shadows moving in the trees, about a sound at night, like breathing made of wind. He claimed they had reached the lake, that something went wrong. But every time he was pressed for details, he shut down, eyes darting to corners of the room, like he expected something to follow. The next morning, Elcio was gone. Security footage from the clinic shows him walking out barefoot at 3:14 a.m., wearing only a thin hospital robe. He didn't take his IV. He didn't say goodbye, just walked out the back door and vanished into the mist. A search was launched, but no trace was ever found. It was as if the jungle had reclaimed him, like a witness too dangerous to leave alive. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy, full of unanswered questions, rising dread, and the creeping realization that this was no longer just a case of 3 people lost in the rainforest. Something else had happened. Something the forest didn't want found. By the 8th day, the jungle was no longer quiet. The Brazilian military had moved in, 2 Zodiac boats slicing through brown water, helicopter blades chopping the air, and radios crackling with coordinates that led nowhere. A full-scale search and rescue operation had begun, stretching across 200 square kilometers of uncharted Amazon rainforest. On paper, it was one of the most coordinated efforts ever conducted in the Javari Valley. On the ground, it was a nightmare. The forest fought back. Rain fell in sheets, turning trails into rivers and rivers into traps. The canopy was so dense, even aerial reconnaissance became guesswork. Heat and humidity wrapped around the teams like a fever. Indigenous trackers from the Marubo and Kanamari tribes joined the effort, moving silently through terrain that chewed up boots and swallowed machetes whole. They knew this forest in ways satellite maps never could, but even they found nothing. No canoe, no gear, no torn tarp or broken motor. For 5 days they pushed deeper, eyes scanning every route, ear alert for the sound of a whimper or a shout. What they found instead chilled them more than a body would have. 13 miles east of where Claudia and Sophia had last been seen, a tracker named Wawa spotted something bright against the mud, a child's shoe, torn at the heel, yellow with faded Velcro straps. It matched the one Sophia had been wearing in the last known photo. But it didn't make sense. The terrain between the riverbank and that location was nearly impassable. No child, not even with help, could have traveled that far on foot, especially not through flooded underbrush, thorns, and waist-high water. There were no other footprints nearby, no animal tracks, just the shoe, half buried under a thin layer of silt, as if gently placed and forgotten by time. The discovery stopped the search in its tracks. For days afterward, the teams redoubled their efforts around that spot. Drones were deployed. Thermal imaging scanned the trees. Divers searched the deeper eddies of the river. But there was nothing else, not even a scrap of cloth or a thread of nylon. It was as if the forest had allowed one artifact to remain, just enough to confirm the story, and then swallowed everything else. The trackers were the first to say it out loud, not the soldiers, not the rescue coordinators, but the men who had walked this forest since birth. Something was wrong. Not just wrong, off. They described it as a silence that felt shaped, like it was watching. Birds stopped singing, insects went quiet, even the wind seemed to avoid certain clearings. And in the heart of it all, the place where Sophia's shoe was found, the trees leaned in as if eavesdropping. That's when the stories began. The elders in São Pedro had kept their distance during the search, but when the teams returned with nothing, they began to talk, quietly, in half-whispers. Tales passed down from their ancestors, of a woman who once defied the forest and was punished for it, a mother who tried to escape a curse and was forced to wander between the trees forever. They called her Ama Sem Pés, the mother with no feet. Her spirit floated just above the earth, they said, unable to rest. She called to children, promised safety, then took them where no one could follow. One elder claimed he'd heard her voice 3 nights before Claudia disappeared, said it came from the water, soft and full of grief. Another told of strange light seen deep in the forest, glowing orbs that hovered without sound, vanishing the moment they were approached. One fisherman swore he saw Sophia's face reflected in the river, even though the water was black with silt. The military dismissed the stories as folklore, stress-induced hallucinations. But the villagers knew better. They didn't search anymore, wouldn't enter the forest after dark. The trackers returned home early, offering no excuse, just silence. One even burned his boots. Investigators chalked it up to coincidence, a series of tragic events in an unforgiving place. But the locals insisted the forest had taken the mother and her daughter, not because of mistake or misfortune, but because the forest wanted them, because something ancient had reached out from the shadows and they were never meant to come back. To this day, the villagers won't say Claudia and Sophia were lost. They use a different word, levadas, taken. By the time the first anniversary passed, the river had long since reclaimed its calm. No more boats, no more radio traffic, no more helicopters overhead, just jungle and silence. 18 months after Claudia and Sofia Rivera disappeared into the Amazon, the investigation was officially closed. The Brazilian federal police issued a final report. No leads, no evidence of foul play, presumed dead. Claudia's editor received a condolence letter. Her remaining equipment was declared unrecoverable. Sofia's school in Buenos Aires held a small ceremony, placing a framed photo in the library. The inscription read, "Forever Exploring." In a courtroom in Buenos Aires, the Rivera family sat in stunned silence as a judge declared both mother and daughter legally deceased. Claudia's mother wept quietly, holding Sofia's last school project, a crayon drawing of a pink jaguar under a yellow sun. Her brother Mateo spoke to reporters outside. "There is no closure," he said, "only paperwork." The grief was heavy, but so were the questions. Some in the family couldn't accept the official explanation. Claudia was too skilled, too careful. Sophia was too smart. There had to be more. Rumors spread through online forums, unofficial theories, whispered by expats and journalists who'd covered the region. One claimed that Claudia had stumbled upon an illegal mining operation in protected land, armed men with too much to lose. Another theory was darker, organ traffickers, preying on isolated travelers. And then there were those who didn't believe the forest had taken them at all, that Claudia had staged the disappearance to escape something, or someone. But these theories never stuck. No ransom note, no financial activity, no sightings, just an echoing void. Over time, the media moved on. New cases pushed old ones off the front page. The search was never officially reopened. The gear was never found. And the forest, as always, kept its secrets. For the world, the story was over. But in the jungle, it was still unfolding. In 2015, nearly 8 years after Claudia and Sophia vanished, their story was a footnote. A cold case buried under newer headlines, remembered only by grieving relatives and late-night Reddit threads. But then a documentary team revisiting unsolved disappearances in the Amazon uncovered something no one expected. A sealed dry bag buried beneath a collapsed palm frond deep inside a riverbank near São Pedro. Inside, still intact after all those years, was a weatherproof hard drive. And on it, Claudia's final video journal entries. The footage wasn't long, roughly 12 minutes, shaky, handheld. The rainforest behind her shimmered with late afternoon heat. Claudia looked tired, not scared yet. Just tired in a way only the jungle could cause. Sweat clung to her face, and mosquitoes buzzed past the lens. Her voice was calm, deliberate. "Day 6, she says, glancing at her notepad. "We're about 40 kilometers south of Lago do Esquecido. No signs of jaguar scat, but the howlers were unusually loud last night. Sophia is doing okay. We had to boil river water twice." Then her voice shifts, just slightly. "There's something else," she says, eyes flicking toward the tree line. "We keep hearing this humming at night. It's not mechanical, more like a tone, low, rhythmic. It starts after sundown and moves, not wind, not bugs. It feels close." She forces a smile. "Probably nothing." In the final clip shot from inside the tent, Claudia whispers into the camera. The light is dim. She's trying not to wake Sophia, who can be seen curled up, asleep beside her. "Last night I saw lights moving through the trees," she says. 3 of them. Pale blue. No sound. They didn't flicker. Her hand shakes as she adjusts the lens. Elcio says it's forest spirits. I don't believe in that. But I'm starting to... The footage ends mid-sentence. A soft rustle outside. Claudia looks up, distracted, and the screen cuts to black. The documentary team released the footage in a limited web series called Vanished Voices from the Jungle. It went viral in under 48 hours. Comments flooded in. Some called it fake. Others saw proof of something far older, far darker than anyone had imagined. For the Rivera family, it reopened wounds. For the rest of the world, it reopened the mystery. The forest had spoken, just long enough to remind everyone. Claudia and Sophia had never truly left. For years, the forest remained silent. No new leads, no new sightings, just the same questions echoing through digital voids. What happened to Claudia and Sophia Rivera? Why did the guide flee? What were those lights? But as time passed, the story refused to die. Instead, it evolved, becoming myth, obsession, cautionary tale. Online forums lit up every anniversary. Reddit threads unraveled for miles, each more intricate than the last. Armchair investigators pored over satellite images, comparing tree lines, zooming in on clearings that might have once been campsites. Some said Claudia had found something, evidence of illegal mining maybe. Others swore the humming she mentioned was ultrasonic interference from military installations hidden in the jungle. A popular YouTube series called Vanishing Point did a full 3-part breakdown on the case, complete with speculative animations and interviews with South American cryptid hunters. The views climbed into the millions. But with each theory came danger. In 2021, an American survivalist named Dane Wexler attempted to retrace Claudia's exact route with a drone, GPS, and handheld sonar. He was never found. In 2023, a French paranormal investigator claimed to have found a second shoe belonging to Sophia, until it was identified as a discarded sandal from a tourist's camp. The jungle doesn't care about closure, it consumes. Locals began warning visitors more forcefully. Old women clutched rosaries when tourists mentioned the Riveras. Guides refused certain paths, especially at night. Don't chase ghosts in the Amazon, they said. The ones who disappear aren't always taken by jaguars. Even among the skeptical, there was something sacred about the forest's silence. You didn't provoke it. You didn't dig too deep. But someone always does. In 2025, 18 years after the disappearance, the forest blinked. Just once. And someone was watching when it did. July 3, 2025. The same date Claudia and Sophia had pushed off from San Pedro nearly 2 decades earlier. Deep in the Alto Javari region, 2 climate researchers from São Paulo were conducting routine biomass surveys, measuring soil acidity, tracking insect populations, and mapping tree canopy health with LIDAR. It was supposed to be a standard expedition, nothing extraordinary, until one of them tripped over metal. At first glance, it looked like rusted debris, jungle scrap from a decades-old mining rig, or maybe a hunter's blind, long since abandoned. But as they cleared the vines and rotting leaves away, a shape began to emerge. Thin aluminum rods bent at odd angles, a central pivot joint corroded but intact. A camera tripod, collapsed, skeletal, with moss and fabric snarled in the gear mechanism. It had no business being there, no trails nearby, no camps, no human activity for miles in any direction, just jungle, dense, ancient, and untouched. The researchers called it in. Local authorities were slow to respond. They always were. But one of the scientists, Adriana Mello, a field ecologist, recognized the significance immediately. The tripod wasn't just any model, it was professional grade, high-end, the kind used by documentary photographers. Claudia Rivera had carried one just like it. Even more chilling was the fabric, wedged in the tripod's hinge, preserved by resin and moisture. A patch of blue canvas, barely larger than a hand. It matched the rain jacket Claudia had been wearing in the last known photo. News traveled fast. Within days, a private investigative team, funded by an independent media outlet, arrived at the site. They began a coordinated excavation around the find. No bones, no camera, but they did find a buckle, a rusted zipper, a coil of red paracord. And then, 50 meters east of the tripod, a scrap of laminated paper, jungle warped, soaked through, but bearing faint letters in Claudia's handwriting. It was a page from a field journal, just 7 words half smeared by time. Something watches us, even in daylight. The jungle had opened its mouth again, just wide enough to whisper. But it wasn't finished yet. They followed the clues like breadcrumbs, rusted metal, torn cloth, scraps of forgotten presents buried in soil and memory. 50 meters beyond the camera tripod, the jungle gave up something else. A tangle of collapsed brush formed the outline of a structure, 4 upright branches, bound with decayed rope, half swallowed by moss. It wasn't shelter, not really, but it was human, deliberate, a camp, or what was left of one. The team moved slowly. Every inch mattered. They marked the perimeter, documented every artifact. Under a pile of rotted palm fronds, they found a tarnished spoon. Nearby, a child's plastic bracelet, blue, with tiny, faded dolphins. It could have belonged to anyone, but the Rivera family would later confirm it matched one Sophia had received on her 9th birthday. Near the edge of the site, tucked between 2 rocks, was a sealed bag coated in grime and algae. Inside, a leather-bound field journal wrapped in a decayed rain cover and a watertight pouch containing 3 rolls of undeveloped 35mm film. The journal's pages were warped, the ink faded and blurred in places, but some entries remained intact. Claudia's handwriting, unmistakable, sharp and upright, occasionally rushed, as if time was against her. The early entries were what you'd expect, notes about wildlife sightings, water levels, equipment maintenance. Then, on what appeared to be day 9, her tone shifted. "Something's wrong," she wrote. "Elcio says we're off course, but he won't explain." The river's changed, or maybe we did. I'm hearing sounds at night that don't belong here. Not animal, not wind. A few pages later, another entry. It watches at night. We stay awake in shifts. Sophia is scared. That line sat alone, centered, with no punctuation. It looked like it had been written in the dark. A few smudges followed, possibly fingerprints, possibly rain. But the meaning was clear. Claudia hadn't just been lost. She had been hunted, or at least believed she was. The team held their breath as they continued to sift through the remains of the camp, a broken lens, a mold-eaten map, and then, buried beneath a slab of bark, a 4th item, a torn corner of Sophia's sketchbook. On it, a crude drawing of a tall shape between trees. No face, no features, just black ink smeared with panic. The film was old, sealed but fragile. The emulsion layers possibly degraded after nearly 2 decades in heat, moisture, and decay. Still, the team sent it to a forensic imaging lab in Manaus, where specialists began the careful process of chemical restoration. 2 rolls were blank. Water had seeped through just enough to erase their contents. But the third had something. 4 images survived. The first was a blurry shot of the river at dusk, faint outlines of trees, a plastic water bottle resting on a rock. Nothing unusual. The second was from inside the tent. Claudia, eyes tired, holding Sophia close. Sophia looked directly at the camera, her expression unreadable. Behind her, faint impressions of foliage framed the shot, sharp enough to suggest they weren't in dense cover. They were exposed. The third photo was darker, taken at night, possibly by accident. A flashlight's beam illuminates tangled roots. The image is tilted, as if the camera was dropped. A smear of motion, the edge of a shoe. Sophia's, maybe. It's impossible to tell. And then the last image. It's hard to describe. Shot from a low angle, The photo appears to have been taken while the camera lay on the ground, lens tilted upward. Most of the frame is shadow. But in the upper corner, blurred, grainy, but unmistakably there, a silhouette, tall, thin. Its edges are not sharp, but not fully obscured either. No facial features, no clear limbs. Just height, presence, and something else. A reflective glint where eyes might be. Experts ruled out a jaguar, not the shape, not the position. It wasn't an animal, at least not one documented in the region. It also wasn't one of the rescuers. The timestamp on the photo, once recovered from metadata, matched the estimated 9th night of their disappearance. Theories erupted instantly. Cryptozoologists pointed to indigenous myths, forest spirits, shapeshifters, watchers in the trees. Skeptics argued it was pareidolia, a trick of light and shadow. Some said it was a local warning figure, a ritual effigy left to ward off intruders. But others saw something else, something not meant to be found, something that hadn't just appeared in the photo, but had stared back into the lens. The last frame broke the internet. To some it was proof, to others a final cruel mystery. But to the Rivera family it was worse than all of it, evidence that someone or something had been with them until the end. The artifacts were confirmed within days. The child's bracelet, the journal, the tripod, the fabric, all definitively linked to Claudia and Sofia Rivera. The handwriting was Claudia's. The dolphin bracelet matched photos from Sofia's 10th birthday. Even the torn corner of a sketchbook matched paper stock Claudia had used in her travel kits. There was no doubt. They had been there. But what no one could answer was how or why they had stayed alive long enough to leave behind so much. The field camp was miles from any known trail, with no access to navigable water. Survival experts brought in to assess the case were baffled. No one survives that deep in the Amazon without fire, clean water, or a sustainable food source, said Diego Ramos, a survival instructor who had trained dozens of search and rescue units. Even experienced jungle trekkers don't last more than a week without extraction. The journal suggested they survived at least 9 to 10 days, possibly more. But how? One theory focused on psychological breakdown, tropical fever, isolation, sleep deprivation. Claudia had started writing in fragments by the end. Her shift from scientific notes to fearful warnings suggested a descent into paranoia. It's common in deep jungle cases, said Dr. Helena Marquez, a trauma psychologist. You lose your sense of time. You start seeing patterns. The forest becomes something else. Alive, predatory. Another theory pointed to a territorial predator. Perhaps a rogue jaguar, rare but not impossible, had shadowed their camp. Some experts proposed that Sofia had been injured early on, forcing Claudia to stay put. That could explain the makeshift shelter and the lack of further movement. But if they were hiding from an animal, why no signs of struggle? Why stay silent? Others wondered if Elcio, the guide, had left them deliberately. His disappearance, his brief mutterings in the hospital. Had he panicked? Or had something happened he couldn't explain? Ultimately, the evidence raised more questions than it answered. The journal showed fear, not confusion, intentionality. Claudia knew something was near, and she was trying to protect her daughter. But from what? Science tried to provide answers. But the deeper the case went, the more it felt like logic was being outpaced by something older, something wild, something unnamed. When the excavation team published images of the site, it didn't take long for the symbols to draw attention, etched into tree bark, marked in soft soil, arranged in precise circular formations with small stones. Most were too faded to decipher, but others looked fresh, as if carved after the disappearance. That was impossible, of course. And yet, the cuts were sharp, clean, deliberate. Unable to identify the symbols through any known language database, the team brought in indigenous elders from the Kanamari and Matses tribes, people whose ancestors had lived in the region for centuries. Their reactions were quiet, uneasy. One elder refused to enter the site. Another walked the perimeter in silence, then sat by the remnants of the tripod and wept. "These are not marks made by your people," one said, "and not by ours either. These are for the forest, messages for it, or from it." He pointed to a cluster of stones in a tight circle, surrounded by broken twigs arranged like spokes on a wheel. "This is a binding place," he explained, "a warning, or a trap. We don't touch these." A second elder examined a carving on the base of a tree near the camp's edge, 3 horizontal lines, intersected by 1 vertical slash. He said nothing for a long time, then finally whispered, "The forest marked them." When pressed, he elaborated, "Not all who enter are meant to leave. Some are kept, chosen, swallowed. It does not mean evil, but it does mean final." The team documented every symbol, but none could be matched to any cultural origin, living or extinct. One researcher suggested they might be invented, possibly by Claudia herself, a response to isolation or illness. But the elders disagreed. "This is old," they said, "older than us, older than you." The tension between science and spirit became impossible to ignore. For every data point, there was a myth. For every footprint, a whispered legend. And somewhere in between sat Claudia and Sophia, caught in a place where the laws of nature and the stories of the forest overlapped, blurred, and became indistinguishable. Whatever had happened in that clearing, one truth echoed through every explanation, scientific or otherwise. They had not been alone. In the end, the forest gave back just enough to remind the world it was watching. A tripod, a journal, a child's bracelet, 4 photographs, echoes of lives that had once pulsed through the heart of the Amazon, now reduced to fragments, scattered across time and roots and soil. But there were no bodies, no final image of peace, no conclusive explanation, only fear, only silence, only what was left behind. The investigation was closed again, but no one called it solved. The Brazilian government erected a memorial stone near the edge of the Alto Javari Reserve. It sits just off a trail that leads nowhere, surrounded by dense undergrowth that almost immediately tries to reclaim it. The plaque is simple, just their names, birth dates, and a line chosen by Claudia's mother. To walk into the wild is not to disappear. It is to become part of something larger. Visitors still come. Some leave flowers. Others, hand-carved charms or children's drawings. A few bring questions. Most leave with more than they arrived with. Not answers, but a presence, an unease, a sense that some places were never meant to be understood. In Buenos Aires, Claudia and Sophia's story has become part of local folklore. University students study her early work, her wildlife photography, her fearless field notes from Patagonia to the Pantanal. But the jungle is always the last entry, always the final page, always the question mark no one can erase. The documentary that began as a passion project is now taught in media schools. It ends with the final photo, grainy, dark, impossible, and a voiceover from Sophia's last recorded laugh, pulled from a forgotten memory card. For a moment, it sounds like hope. Then the screen cuts to black. Some say the forest protected them, others say it punished them, but those who knew them best believe something in between, that they saw something they weren't supposed to, or perhaps something that was never meant to be seen at all. No matter what version of the story you believe, one thing is certain. Claudia and Sophia never came back, and the forest never truly let them go. Sometimes the Amazon takes more than life. It takes truth. This story was intense, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.